Welcome to everyone joining our webinar this afternoon, which is being facilitated by ICAHD UK, which represents the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. ICAHD UK was founded in 2004, and our slogan is resisting apartheid, building a shared democracy. And it's the whole issue of democracy that we want to focus on today's webinar, entitled The Undemocratic Elections in Israel and Palestine. With Israel's control that has been established over all of historic Palestine, and with its settler colonial policies, Israel ensures that the Palestinians don't have full equal rights and representation within the state of Israel, as well as what's happening in the occupied territories. It's not possible for them to shape their lives and their future under these current systems. So during this webinar, arguments are going to be made about why, in order for there to be any meaningful political change, these dysfunctional systems need to change. We're joined by two speakers who are joining us from the ground, and they'll help us to understand these dynamics and what's happening. We shall start today with Salem Barahmeh. Salem is speaking to us from Ramallah. He's the executive director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy, PIPD. It was established in 2018. Salem is a policy member of Al-Shabaka. He's currently a non-resident fellow of the U.S. Middle East Project. He received his BA in government at Lawrence University in Wisconsin, the U.S., and his MA in law and politics from King's College, London. So, Salem, welcome. We are delighted to have you with us. Would you please start by explaining the dates that have been set now for the 3 elections called by the PA to help us understand it, and then we'll sort of take it from there. So we've got roughly 15, 20 minutes for us to sort of interact with each other before we'll then move on to Jeff, and then after that we'll have our Q&A with our audience. So Salem, please, can you, yes, unmute yourself. Welcome, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Linda. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you, and thank you for hosting me. And it's really lovely to see all of you, and I hope you're having a great day. I heard it was sunny in the UK, so you know, thank you for being indoors on a screen and not outside enjoying the weather in the garden. To give you a bit of context, I think I will talk about the 3 elections, but I think I want to talk about the system they're happening within, right? So at the moment, you know, we had elections announced in Israel and also within the Palestinian Authority, side by side, and effectively, you know, they operate within a system where you know, between the land between the river and the sea, that has 13 million to 14 million human beings. Forget about their nationality, their ethnicity. 14 million human beings. And you know, those human beings are you know, operate under or live under a system that guarantees freedom and rights based on ethno-national identity. So if you're Jewish Israeli, you get the full spectrum of rights, and if you're Palestinian, you're put in one of 4 categories. The first category is Palestinian citizen of Israel, which is by law unequal. If you know anything, nation state law that says that the Jewish people have the unique right to self-determination in the land of Israel. And also 60 laws that discriminate against these Palestinians and you know, treat them as second-class citizens. Then you have the Palestinians of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. They're not citizens, they're residents, and they are under threat of losing their residency at any moment. And also they are discriminated against in terms of the resources from the Israeli municipality. They are not allowed to vote in national elections. So fundamentally, they don't really get to vote for the entity that rules and governs their lives. And because of that, majority of people in Jerusalem are living under the poverty line. And as you know, if you know anything about what's happening recently in Jerusalem, families in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem are being
gardens to buy that seats.
Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah are about to be evicted from their homes where they've lived for decades, if not longer, at the behalf of Israeli settlers. And then you have the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, which I'm a part of. And here, the supreme authority, the entity that's sovereign over us, is not the Palestinian Authority, it's actually the Israeli military. So under that system, we don't have the right of the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Palestinian political parties are actually illegal. And there's no, any form of protest is met with very severe repercussions. And I'll give you an example. So if today I write a Facebook status criticizing the Israeli occupation, an Israeli military soldiers can arrive in my house at 4 a.m., arrest me, and take me to an Israeli military court, where the conviction rate is 99.9%. So you're going to get convicted one way or another, just for writing a Facebook status. While an Israeli settler who lives on the hill next door, and I can see two, by the way, two Israeli settlements from my window, if they commit a violent crime, they're under the jurisdiction of an Israeli civilian court. And that means, and the conviction rate is almost 0%. So that's the level of discrimination. So, even though I live under the PA, the sovereign and supreme authority is actually the military. And obviously, as you know, they control our freedom of movement. So I can't fly from an airport here. I actually have to go to Jordan to come and visit the UK when I went to study. Or access to water. 86% of our water in the West Bank is controlled by Israel and is diverted to settlements. So things like that. The last category is who's allowed to return. So any Jewish person anywhere in the world can obviously come back to Israel and become a citizen. Any Palestinian cannot. Not only can't they become a citizen, but they can't even come visit their homeland. So that's the system which these elections are happening under. And I think the context is really important, because for 5 million Palestinians that live in the West Bank under Israeli occupation, that includes East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza, we effectively don't vote for the regime that rules our lives, right? While the settlers who live next door get to vote for that regime, even though we share the same land, and share is a very generous term. So, your rights, your ability to vote for who rules you, who governs you, is very much determined by your ethno-national identity, not anything else. It's not geography, because if it was geography, obviously settlers living in an occupied land within the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza wouldn't allow to vote or participate or even run in Israeli elections, right? Because it's outside what is considered Israel. And when these elections happen, you drive around the West Bank and you see Israeli settlers running for the Knesset with big posters, and it's really in your face, and it shows you the two-tier system of discrimination, and that shows you how the term is becoming more used, I think, in public discourse. But when you have a system of domination of one people over another, right? And it's done in a systematic way to oppress one people over another. That's apartheid. So essentially, we're having, and by the way, it's now minority rule over the majority of people who live between this piece of land, between the river and the sea, right? Again, I'm talking about human beings. I'm not talking about anybody with a nationality, just purely as human beings. So within this context, we have these elections, the Palestinian elections, and they've called for 3. And obviously this comes after 15 years without any form of elections for the PA. And the PA in its existence today only controls about 40% of the West Bank, and that's partial control. Am I disconnecting by any chance?
You're fine, Salem. You can continue.
Okay, sorry, the screen was freezing, that's why. So we're essentially voting for an entity that has partial control of the West Bank, and obviously has no sovereignty. So what are we voting for is the other question. So we're voting under an apartheid system, and then what are we voting for? We're voting for a body that is supposed to be the parliament, the legislature of this Palestinian Authority, which was established under the Oslo peace accords for a 5-year mandate until we were able to have a state. It was supposed to be our vehicle to statehood within a 5-year span. But obviously, here we are almost 30 years later, and we're no closer to a state, because if you look at a map of the West Bank and Jerusalem and Gaza, it's like an archipelago, and it has islands, right, of Palestinian population centers that are being drowned out by Israeli control. So we don't have a state, but then we're still voting for this entity that's governing only these small islands. And the context of the elections for the PLC, which is the legislature of the PA, are also extremely undemocratic. So 15 years without any form of elections. The elections in 2006, if you remember, the US and Israel didn't like the results. And then they started the internal fighting within the Palestinian politics, and we have the split between Hamas and Fatah. And within that context, both parties, both factions have became extremely authoritarian. And haven't allowed for any type of political organizing in Palestine, for a new generation to partake and exercise its rights in representation and democracy. There isn't essentially a political system in which our voices can be heard. And so if you look at Palestinian society, the average age within Palestine is 21. We're an extremely young society, but the average age of the leadership of the PLO is 70. Basically, they've been in power since they were 30 years old. Almost 40, 50 years ago. And that's the context we operate under. So after 15 years, without any room for any form of opposition or political participation or engagement, they announced the PA PLC elections. And they said you have 3 months to compete. And basically, on top of that, they changed the election laws. And this has a really big impact on how can you engage politically here. The first is you have to be 28 to register to be a candidate in the PLC elections, which is the minimum age, and it's one of the highest in the world. And so when you talk about population, that's average age is 21, that's about 1 million people who can't run, between the ages of 18 to 28. The other restriction is you have to pay $20,000 to register a list in the elections. And if you know anything about the Palestinian economy, it has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, especially for young people. So where are people going to get this money to be able to participate? The last point within these laws is that you have to, if you work for a specific employer, you have to resign from your job. So the rest of the world, you resign when you win an election, not if you want to run for an election. And here, especially if you work for civil society or the government, 2 of the biggest employers in the country. So effectively, a lot of people were not able to run after 15 years of wanting to participate in a democracy or a democratic process. The last thing, we had a political system here that looked like the UK, where you had local constituencies and national lists. And they changed that to just having national proportional representation, which is very similar to Israel. And what that did is that if you don't have a strong national network of a political base, you can't compete. So you no longer represent your community. You need to be able to compete in some of the largest cities around Palestine. And again, if you don't have a political base that you've been able to build for the last 15 years, you're effectively not going to compete. So these elections, these PA, PLC elections, have very much been constructed in a way to avoid all competition, to avoid any young faces and voices to emerge. And on top of all of that, now they're likely going to get postponed. Why? Because I think the PA and Hamas felt under threat by emerging the infighting within Fatah, the party, And I think Israel also doesn't want that to happen. So they're basically using East Jerusalem as the card for postponing these elections or canceling them. Because the Israelis will say to the PA, you're not allowed to have PLC elections in East Jerusalem. And so therefore, it's going to get postponed very likely. So that's the PLC elections. And obviously, Israel has been notorious for arresting members of the PLC, not allowing any type of political participation. Again, it's illegal for me to be part of a political party. I can't go register a new political party here. It's illegal under an Israeli military order, because the PA, at the end of the day, answers to that authority. So the other two elections, one is the presidential election for the PA, and that should have been in July. And again, who knows if that's going to go through? And because if Marwan Barghouti nominates himself, who's currently is a political prisoner in an Israeli prison, he's likely to win, right? He's extremely popular within Fatah, and there's no other person who can really run for the presidency. But again, we don't know if that's going to even go through, since the PLC elections might not go through. And the last elections that were announced, and they're not elections. This is they're for the parliament of the PLO. And this is where it gets confusing, because there are two parliaments for two different entities. So the PA is the administrative body in the West Bank that should have jurisdiction in Gaza and East Jerusalem, and it doesn't. And then the PLO, obviously, it's a very renowned acronym. I think everyone knows or has heard of the PLO. The PLO legally is the sole representative of the Palestinian people. It speaks on behalf of Palestinians. But the PLO has been hollowed out over the last 30 years, and all the power has moved to the PA. And a part of the PLO is the parliament of the PLO, which is called the Palestinian National Council. Palestinian National Council has never been elected in its history, right? In the 60s and 70s, it was a body that was chosen by quota system through the factions. So the ruling factions, Fatah, PFLP, DFLP, etc., would choose their representations, and other unions, the women's union, the students' union, etc. And I think for that time, it modeled, I think, a lot of anti-colonial struggle movements, for example, like the ANC in South Africa. But today, there's no reason for why it has to be done that way. And so what my generation is asking for is, we actually want the PNC and the PLO to be reformed. One, to be given its power back away from the PA, because that should be our representative. Two, we need direct elections for the PNC. And that means we get to vote for who represents us and speaks on our behalf, not just in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, but for Palestinians everywhere, all around the world. Because actually the majority of Palestinians are not in Palestine. They're refugees or in the diaspora and can't come back. And they don't have a form of formal representation. So again, that's not an election. It's basically the people in charge choosing who participates in the parliament. So the elections that are happening here are happening under the construct of an apartheid regime and an entity that is very much restricted in its sovereignty by it. And then the elections that we want are not going to happen within the PNC of the PLO. And it's a very grim reality for young Palestinians, because we want participation, we want our voices heard. We have a fundamentally different vision than the generation that came before us, but we're not allowed to articulate it. We're not allowed to mobily organize around it. And so a network of young people has come together recently to start something called Jil al-Tajdid al-Demokrati in Arabic, which translates to the generation for democratic revival. And basically, we're asking young people in Palestine to get politically active, because our main competitors are not Fatah or Hamas. It's actually political apathy. And I think you see that in young people all over the world. They don't vote, they don't participate. And so in Palestine, it's compounded because there's no political system to start with. And they start believing in the power of politics to change anything. So for us, I'm part of this group. We've been mobilizing and engaging people and trying to get them to start, caring again about political participation, so we can redefine that, and to put pressure on our different institutions for reform and democratic change. so we can hear the voices of the younger generation that represents the majority of society. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the elections, the system, and I think what's happening on the ground. And I don't know, Linda, if you'd like me to add anything else before we turn over to Jeff and questions.
Yes, I would like to have you just expand a little bit more on one thing before we turn to Jeff. And you mentioned that there's this new group, Generation for Palestinian Revival. Is that something which is part of your organization or not? Or what does your organization do? Because you focus on democracy. And so could you just explain that a little bit before we call on Jeff?
I'll explain the difference between both. So I'll start with my organization. So
Yes.
I'm the director for an organization called the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. And it started a few years ago. And basically the idea there is, also as part of the younger generation, we didn't like how our story was told all around the world. I lived in the US, I lived in the UK, and I saw the way people were discussing our reality. And we wanted to fundamentally change that and make sure that we uplift Palestinian voices from Palestine so they're heard. And we operate under a North Star that is based in progressive values. So freedom, justice, equality, and rights for all, regardless of who you are, where you're from, whether you're Palestinian or Jewish Israeli or Jewish American, etc. We believe in those values. And so everything we do, the stories we tell, the content we produce is based on that. So we do a lot of advocacy, so engaging with political parties, members of parliament, youth parties, diplomats, etc., to try to advocate on behalf of Palestine. We also do a lot of awareness raising campaigns on social media, using that as a platform to reach wider audiences. And then we create a lot of different content. So one of the pieces of content we created was actually a virtual reality tour of Palestine. So you can now visit Palestine, different parts of Palestine. You can go to Gaza, to Hebron, to Jerusalem, to Beirut, to Ramallah through VR goggles. And you can go on a tour led by a tour guide from that community. Another thing we've created recently was we saw the popularity of food shows and food content online. You know, if you go to Netflix, you see a million different food shows. If you go to YouTube, same thing. And so we want to be able to communicate about our culture, not just about the hard politics, but also what makes our culture beautiful. And I think food creates empathy like no other. You know, nothing's like sharing a meal together. And so we created this show also to kind of span Palestinian generations. It's called Tata's Kitchen, which is Grandma's Kitchen. And basically we have a chef, a professional French-trained chef who's Palestinian, who travels to different parts of Palestine, cooks with a Palestinian grandma, and teaches her recipe, talks about the culture, the tradition, the history. And you can watch all of that on our YouTube channel. So we have 5 episodes and then another 5 coming out. And the next 2 are going to be on Hebron and Gaza. And those are going to be really exciting. So that's kind of the organization, what we do. In terms of the Generation for Democratic Revival, we're another group of young people who are really frustrated with the political system itself within Palestine, domestic Palestinian politics. And here we're asking for political representation and the space to participate without being repressed. We're not a political party, we're not a movement, we're just a group that is working on awareness raising and getting younger people involved in politics. So for example, we were anticipating that the elections were going to get postponed. So we created our own virtual list and virtual elections. So people now can vote for young candidates who haven't had a chance to run in the elections because of age, money, or resignation, or the election system. We're building them a platform where they can talk to people, talk about the issues that matter to them, and then people can vote for them online. And that's another way to kind of break this apathy and get people engaged. So that's what we're doing on the other hand. So a lot of exciting things, a lot of sleepless nights, but all work that I think needs to happen.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Salem, for that explanation. And as I said at the beginning, you know, as ICAHD, we focus on democracy. We're working for, toward a democratic state in Palestine, Israel. And so it's been wonderful to have you with us and for you to share your activities, your perspectives, your insight with us just now. And we will come back to you during the Q&A because we've got a couple of questions we'll put to you then. Thank you. And now let's see if Jeff can join us, please.
I joined you.
Jeff, we can only hear you very softly and I cannot see you.
Can't see me? I see me on
Oh,
this.
yes. Okay, good. Now you're with us. Thank you. Jeff, we have many people with us today who know you, and they will not need an introduction to you, but there are new names here. So I do need to say a few things. So Jeff Halper is the co-founder, the director of ICAHD, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. He is an anthropologist. He's taught at universities in different countries around the world. He's currently also on the steering committee for the Undemocratic State campaign in Israel, Palestine. And his latest book is this one, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State. But today, Jeff is joining us from Jerusalem to speak about the Israeli elections, which happened on the 23rd of March. And there's no conclusion in the way forward with the government. So Jeff, will you start? We'll give you 15 minutes, about 15 minutes. Jeff, if you can give us an overview of the elections, how the system happens, why you believe that it's not, again, a real democracy, you know, especially for the Palestinian citizens, and talk about what's happening and who's running the country, who's actually running this country at the moment, you know, and things like that. Okay, Jeff? Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Well, thanks, Linda. Thanks to ICAHD UK for organizing this. Thanks to Salem for this is the first time I've appeared with Salem. So it's been very interesting to hear his take on these things. And all of you, of course, most of whom I know very well. You know, I guess the elections really show, in a way, what Salem was saying, but the opposite, how you have the settlers running around and it's in your face. That separation between Israeli citizens and Palestinian non-citizens, the same thing from the other point of view here. And that is how much there's an electoral campaign and there's candidates and there's issues and there's a whole process that's in Palestine that has absolutely nothing to do with Palestine, in a sense. In other words, what we would call the first thing that comes to our mind, Palestinians, the occupation, peace, all that whole discourse of ours is completely irrelevant. It's a non-issue in Israel and in the Israeli elections. The Haaretz newspaper had a poll of what's on the minds of the Israeli voters. And what we would consider, you know, our issues, the occupation and peace and all of that, was number 11 on the list. I mean, security is up there to 3 or 4 or 5. It's also not super high because most Israelis today feel a great sense of personal security. The whole issue of terrorism has been put aside. We don't see Palestinians anymore. The wall is up. The army's dealing with them. So even in that sense, the whole issue of security itself has really gone down the list of priorities. But when Israelis say security, they mean their own security. They don't mean, you know, the security of Palestinians or security in the sense of the country, of the wider country, only of their part of the country. And that really isn't an issue very much anymore. So in terms of what we're talking about, Palestine and Palestinians and rights and ending occupation and solutions, it's really not on the Israeli agenda. It's almost become a non-issue. And which makes it very hard, obviously, to try to work with the Israeli public because they're just not interested. So you have that. In the end, just really quickly, you know, we have, see, the problem in Israel, it's undemocratic, but in another sense. It's very democratic in some ways. and that is that you have a very vibrant democratic process. We have 39 parties that ran in the last election. Something like 12 or 13 actually got into the parliament. And so it's super democratic from that point of view. The problem here, of course, is that you don't vote for candidates. You see, the whole country, which is Israel within the 48 borders, plus, as Salem said, plus the settlements that are in the West Bank and East Jerusalem that are less part of the Israeli system in that sense, even though they haven't been formally annexed. They're all one voting block or one voting district. So I don't have a candidate or a representative that I'm voting for. I don't have a representative in parliament. I don't have an MP. I don't even have a representative in the city council. All I can do is I go into the voting booth, and here's 39 pieces of paper with the different political parties' names on them. And I pick a party. I vote for a party. And it's the party that decides who the candidates are. And they can do it through primaries. They can do it just in a very centralized way. So they present the voters with the list. The voters have nothing to do with the list. The list of people on the party ballot don't represent anybody in particular. They certainly don't represent any districts. And all I can do is vote Labor, Likud, some religious party, some Russian immigrant party, a Sephardic party, an ultra-Orthodox party, and a yuppie party. I mean, there's all kinds of parties I can vote for. So what happens is people end up voting for the party that they least object to. Very few people today, especially in the young generation, really have a party that they identify with ideologically. I would even say that the majority of voters for most parties aren't really members of that party, don't really identify, but it's the least of the evils, the lesser evil. So there's a very great sense of disenfranchisement, of a distance between the voters and these lists that you have no control over, including not only the candidates, but the program. You don't have any control over. Then, of course, what happens is you voted. And now, like Linda says, the election's not over yet, because now you've got to put together a coalition government. We have 120 members of parliament. So you need 61, a bare minimum of 61 for a coalition. But 61 isn't really enough because, as you probably know, somebody's sick, somebody's abroad, somebody gets bought off by the other party or whatever. And so you really need 62, 63, 64 in order to form a more stable coalition. Well, the largest party was the Likud, but it only got 30 seats. In other words, the Likud only got a quarter of the votes. So it isn't that Netanyahu and the Likud are so popular. I mean, they got 25%, which is much less than, let's say, Trump got in the American elections. So they're not tremendously popular. So now they have 30 seats. All right, now the question is, how do you get another 31, 32, 33 seats to add to your coalition when the other parties are 5 people, 4 people, 6 people, 10 people? You have to cobble together a coalition of all kinds of tiny parties. So there's no coherent agenda. As a matter of fact, there's no real agenda because all these parties have different agendas. And of course, the smaller the party, the greater the clout, because it's the party of, so now we're in this very weird situation that you're probably aware of, where Netanyahu's managed to cobble together 58 seats, but he needs 61. Well, the 4 that remain, there's only one party that can fill that, and that's the Islamic Party of all parties. The Islamic Party of Mansour Abbas broke away from from the Joint Arab List, which is 3 other parties, and ran on its own. actually Abbas has a fairly close relationship with Netanyahu. And it's interesting, we're beginning to discover, the Islamic Party with Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and there was this whole, all of a sudden, the right wing in Israel is discovering that, you know what? We have a lot of common with the Islamic Party. I mean, we're against gay rights, we family values, we're conservative, we're all of a sudden, the Islamic Party is not so bad for a lot of the people on the right. So but the point is that the Abbas has become the kingmaker. His 4 seats will determine whether Netanyahu can set up a government or not. Now, that's probably not going to happen because you have the real right-wing fascists that came in with Netanyahu. There's Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir and so even some really fascist settlers. And so they won't sit with Abbas under any circumstances. They would rather have a 5th round of elections, because this is our 4th round of elections in 2 years. So that it's very unlikely. Netanyahu has another 2 weeks to set up a government, and then he has to give the mandate back to the president. And then the president will go to the other party, which is really the other side, the opposition, which is really only united by anti-Netanyahu. And here it's really personalized because you've got some super right-wing parties that are anti-Netanyahu, like Bennett, who represents the religious Zionists. Lieberman, who wants to get rid of the Palestinian citizens of Israel in kind of a transfer or a population swap. Some really, Gidon Sa'ar, who's to the right of Netanyahu coming out of the Likud. So it doesn't break down right or left. It breaks down pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu, especially with the corruption charges against him. So now the problem is for the opposition, led by Yair Lapid, who's a kind of a yuppie right-wing. It's basically a right-wing opposition against a right-wing, Netanyahu bloc. And at any rate, they want to try to cobble together a government from about 7 or 8 different parties, going all the way from the Joint Arab List and the Communist Party through Meretz and the Labor Party, which are the Zionist left, and all the way to Bennett and Sa'ar, who are to the right of Netanyahu. So even if they try to do that, I don't see it happening. And what's going to happen, I think, is that there's going to be a 5th round of elections. And what's keeping this whole thing going is Netanyahu, because his fear is going to jail. So in a sense, he's keeping all these rounds of elections going so that eventually he gets to a point where he can somehow set up a government, at least for a week, so he can pass a couple laws that protect him from going to court or that neutralize. So the whole country is kind of hostage to his thing. All right. So at any rate, we're at a stalemate today with no clear way out. Let me just say one other thing, and it has to do with the Palestinian citizens of Israel. What's interesting is how, I want to put this in the right way, because I can't really represent Palestinians, obviously, but from what I hear and from what I know in my involvement with Palestinian citizens of Israel, is that they're also not really, how do I say it? The whole issue of occupation is not on their agenda either, is not high on their agenda either. They really are aloof from or disconnected from the whole issue of occupation. What's motivating them, at least in the last couple election cycles, is getting into the Israeli system, getting into the Israeli government. A couple of elections ago, when Gantz was close. Benny Gantz, when he was the one that might replace Netanyahu, don't forget he was a general of in Gaza, of the destruction. He oversaw the destruction of Gaza, and yet the Joint Arab List endorsed him for prime minister. So I think what are called Israeli Arabs. And actually, we call them Palestinian citizens of Israel. That's the politically correct term. But a lot of them laugh when you say that. And they'll say, no, we're Israeli Arabs. Because to call us Palestinians is going to alienate us from the wider Israeli society that we really want to become a part of. And you see that very much with Abbas from the Islamic Party, but you see it with all the parties. To such a point that there was a whole interview with a lot of the political leaders of the different parties the other day on TV, and they were saying, what do we care about the Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas? What do we care about the Palestinian elections? That doesn't interest us. That's not us. We care about what's happening in Israel because we're Israelis. And right now they're trying to get into Israeli society. So, of course, it makes it difficult for all of us that say, if the two-state solution is gone, which I think all of us agree on, this, the one-state solution is the only solution that's just and workable, and that's what I've been trying to work on. The problem we're having in organizing the one state is that certainly the Palestinians of the West Bank, I mean, Salem can speak to this much more than me, of the West Bank and Gaza, have trouble moving to the one state idea because I think they feel that it's utopian. They're trying to survive. They don't want to fight the PA as well as the Israeli occupation and so on. But inside Israel, where they have more political space, our movement, the One Democratic State campaign, began in 48. They also are having trouble getting Palestinians to buy in because the whole mood is today, let's see if we can integrate into Israel rather than really divorcing from Israel and, and taking the risk of advocating for one state and then completely destroying our chances of ever becoming seen as Israelis. So they're on that cusp of trying to figure out what to do. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And it's interesting to compare what I'm saying and what Salem says of just how absolutely different they are in terms of the dynamics, the issues. I mean, the separation really is an amazing thing. Maybe I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jeff. And we'll draw out more from you in the questions, but I'm going to go back to Salem now so that he has a chance to answer some of the questions that have been put for him. There was a question about elections in Gaza. And so if you'd comment on that, if it's possible. Of course, you were just saying there may not be any elections at all. So it's really, really difficult. But should they proceed, could you comment about elections there? And who do these elections really serve? You spoke about how young Palestinians can't stand for election. In fact, you have to be 28 years old, have to pay $20,000, did you say, and have to give up your job to even stand for election. So with this serving, and there's another question about international observers. In 2006, international observers were allowed in to make sure it was a democratic election. Of course, they said it was official, and it was democratic, but of course it wasn't accepted by the international community, as you mentioned. What's the status regarding international observers being allowed into the country should elections proceed? So can we hear from you on those, please?
Sure thing. Thank you all for those questions. And Jeff, also pleasure to share a platform with you. In terms of elections in Gaza, listen, I think if the elections go through, they're going to go through in Gaza and in the West Bank. They come as a package. PLC elections are going to happen for both. It won't be one without the other because Hamas is actually very keen on elections. And ironically, as a progressive Palestinian, I look at the different parties around us, and the only one that's truly a political party that's democratic internally is actually Hamas, because they have regular elections, they listen to their members, and they have a new leadership every couple of years with a new ideological evolution. So that, that's the sad state of affairs in Palestine. In terms of observers, so the issue is not about whether they're democratic or not on the day of polling, not on the day, people don't play around with the elections on election day. I think that's they're not that stupid, the powers that be. So there were observers in 2006, and there's likely, if they go through, observers in these elections, but Israel was not allowing the EU observers to come in. Actually, Israel was preventing their entry, if anything. But the lack of democracy comes in the lead up to the election. It comes in the system, the institutions, the laws in the 15 years prior to this, where no form of opposition has been able to take place. And I think this goes back to Jeff's point. Jeff, I think this is a really important point I think I'd like to unpack, is about the popularity of the one state solution. I think when you look at an environment where alternative ideas don't have the space to take shape and be part of the public discourse, it's very hard for them to gain popularity. There's a dominant discourse that's being presented by the ruling parties. And I think this is usually not accounted for in public polling, when you try to ask people about, what their preference is. Because at the end of the day, you go to any young Palestinian, again, the majority of our society is under 30, average age is 21. They grew up in Oslo, under Oslo. They were promised a state, didn't get one. And instead of a state, they got a hierarchy of oppression of different institutions. And so if you ask them, what do you actually want? They'll tell you, we want our freedom and our rights. And we're not really tied ideologically to a specific configuration of statehood, but it's not to be understood that we will ever compromise on our fundamental right to self-determination and our freedom or rights. So it's not like a one state within the realm of extreme right-wing Israeli politics. No, it needs to be fundamentally equal, fair, and just. And so I think there's actually a lot of space for to be able to engage with the majority Palestinian society on a different social contract between the river and the sea, where everyone, whether you're Palestinian or whether you're Jewish Israeli or anything else, can live under that constitution with a set values that apply to all. So I think there's a lot of room for that. It just hasn't been able to take shape because there's no political system and there's no democracy and there's no the ability to engage in public discourse. And I think that's what's missing. And that goes back to my point about about many younger people not being able to reflect the way they see the world into the political system. And there's one point I wanted to make also in relation to the Palestinian citizens of Israel. It's very important. I think this is a process of fragmentation that a lot of Palestinians have undergone. And it's something that's been done intentionally, right? By shifting each community's focus to a localized struggle, whether it's police violence in those communities, whether it's unequal resources from their governments, etc. We in the West Bank also have started to care much more about the economy, jobs, and healthcare and education, rather than always thinking about how do we resist the occupation. And this is done, by design. And similarly, if you're a Palestinian refugee in Jordan or Lebanon and Syria, the main thing you care about is survival and the right of return. So there's a localization of the Palestinian struggle in relation to each geographic community. And in that process, there's been a diminishing understanding of a unified Palestinian identity. And so without, again, and this goes back to the idea of why the PLO and the PNC is so important, because it establishes one common denominator with all these Palestinian communities in which they can participate and shape a vision for the future together. And that's missing, fundamentally missing. And that's, I think, without that, we're not going to be able to move forward as a people. And a lot of the blame is on our shoulders as Palestinians, and a leadership that allowed it to get this far. And I think that needs to be addressed. So those are really important things to keep in mind, I think. Yeah, the lack of democracy isn't on voting day. It's about the structure and system in which we live under, and that's governed our lives for the majority of it, if not all of it, that's put us in this place.
Sorry, while we still have you, there was another question about the political parties. We know about Fatah and Hamas. Now I've just lost it here. And I think there's a question about other independent parties, other parties. I believe that there are some people running as independents as well. Say the elections happen, okay? And you've got people who represent Fatah and Hamas, and then a few maybe independents. Could you comment on them, how many they're likely to be, and whether these independents will be enough in number to actually change the dynamic, change the discussion? You're talking about how you want things to really move on. If the elections happen, might some new voices be positive?
That's a really good question. So there's 36 lists running or registered, 36 lists, over 2,000 candidates in total, and that's a lot. But I want to qualify, these are not parties. Again, registering a party in Palestine is illegal. You cannot register a party under the PA. The last party that was established in Palestine was Mubadara by Mustafa Barghouti. And it was actually registered in the PLO and not here. And since then, there haven't been any other parties that have been allowed to register. Again, part of the anti-democratic environment we live under. In terms of the lists and whether they do have a competitive chance at making a difference in entering the parliament if the elections go through, this comes back to the change to the election system. And this is very important because they're preventing people from winning by changing the rules. And here in 2006, the reason why Hamas did so well was Hamas ran local candidates in their own communities versus Fatah, who ran multiple because of the infighting. And most of the votes, although they went to Fatah on aggregate, they dispersed the vote amongst 3 candidates, while Hamas did well because they were well known locally. This cannot happen again. And this actually takes the chance away from these independent lists because to compete, as I mentioned, you need a strong political base all over the country. So you need to be able to win in Gaza. You need to be able to win in Hebron. You need to be able to win in Jerusalem. You need to be able to win in Nablus. And because you haven't had the chance to politically organize for 15 years, most of the people running as independents are virtually unknown. So they can't compete nationally. And that's very similar to the Israeli system. So actually, even though there's a lot of fragmentation within the political parties now, a lot of the independents are not going to get into the parliament because of this rule change. And it was done by design. And that's the scary part. They don't need to rig the election on the day of the election. They've rigged the system. So these new voices actually don't get to change anything from inside the system itself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Salem. Jeff, can we call on you now, please? I don't know if you want to make any comments regarding what Salem has just shared with us, but then a couple of questions that have come up for you relate to just how the amount of instability there is within the state of Israel with all these different parties, the fact that you have to keep having elections. So one of our attendees today said it reminds her of what's happening in Italy as well, and the instability that there is there with all the parties and the number of elections. And then there's also been the situation with Netanyahu that has come up again in the chat line. Now, you started addressing the situation with him. If you could expand upon it a little bit more, because the court case with him has begun. And this is the corruption charges, bribery, fraud. There's another one, isn't there? So yes, comment on that a little bit more, and then I'll look to see if there was something else to put to you as well. So Jeff, please.
Well, you know, so much of the political life in Israel revolves around Netanyahu. It really is a one-man system in a way. You know, and you know, people look around on the right and left and don't see another candidate of the stature that, you know, that can be prime minister. There's a lot of little political hacks running around, but no one has a stature that's competing with Netanyahu's stature. As you know, not that you have to agree with him, but you've got to give Netanyahu credit. And that is, I mean, not only he is a very good manager. He's corrupt and he's evil, I think, and everything else, but he's a good manager. The Israeli economy is doing great. Our arms exports are out of this world. Then the country is stable. You know, despite the electoral stuff, the country is stable and doing very well. As a matter of fact, we're not wearing masks anymore. You know, we've almost eliminated the COVID. They just did just today it came out of about 1,000 tests they did. They had one COVID case. So, you know, from that point of view, he's getting credit as well for the vaccinations and everything else, not of Palestinians, but within Israel itself. Having, you know, so I think what's interesting here is that I think Netanyahu's at the end anyway. He's at the end of his tenure because people are tired of him. People have never liked him very much. I mean, he has a certain status, it's true, a stature, but he's never been very popular. He's a very polarizing figure. His family aggravates everybody. And so, you know, this whole anti-Netanyahu movement is very strong with these huge demonstrations every Saturday night, you know, by the prime minister's residence. So I think he's on his way out. You know, if it's not this round, it's the next round. And so what's interesting here, this is something to look for, is this. I think Netanyahu has succeeded in keeping the lid on, which is really a very unstable situation. Occupation, everything going on with the Palestinians, the instability, you know, including things with Iran and, you know, the whole region is kind of, and Netanyahu has managed to keep the lid on it, to keep international support for Israel. He's great at Hasbara, at PR. He's a native English speaker. He knows everybody. I mean, he has a very big vision. He knows how to use the international community in a very, you know, he's close to Putin. He's close to Biden in a way. He's very close to Trump. He knows Xi. He's good friends with Modi, Bolsonaro, you know, Johnson. So, you know, that's been a real benefit for Israel, is they've had this manager that's managed to keep this whole thing going. I think what we can start to look at, and this is an opening for us, is the next person that comes in isn't going to have those skills. Let's say it's Gideon Sa'ar, or Naftali Bennett, or Lapid. First of all, these are people that you've never heard of. They have no international standing. People don't know who they are. Once they get to know them, they're going to hate their policies. You think Netanyahu's policies are unpopular in the world. Wait till you hear. Now you have this whole thing going on in the UK. You have this Likud ambassador, the Hotoveli, the Israeli ambassador to Britain, to the UK, who's this terrible, crazy Likud person. And now you've got Zionist youth groups that are boycotting conferences that she's going to. So, I mean, she's too much. I mean, Jews are anyway a little bit liberal, and I think they're getting to be weaned away from this Israeli thing. Well, Sa'ar and Bennett and these guys are to the right of Hotoveli. So once you get to know them and get to know their policies, I think it's going to be completely untenable. Now, Bennett aside, because Bennett's parents are American, but Saar, Lapid, these other people, they don't know English that well. English is their second or third language. They're not very articulate. They don't know the international community. I don't know if Saar's ever met Putin. I don't know how much Lapid knows Bolsonaro or Biden. So I think in this pro-Netanyahu era, it's not that the policies are going to change. You know, it's still the right wing, and the right wing won the election, even though the right wing itself is split between the anti and pro-Netanyahu factions. But without Netanyahu, it's going to be very hard for the right wing in Israel to continue, to get the international support that Netanyahu has had. It's going to be much harder to expend the political capital to support Israel in the world. And I think it's going to alienate the Jews in the world, among others, and that's going to create a whole new dynamic. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Not a change in Israeli public opinion, of course, that's not going to change, but a real change in Israel's ability to manage this conflict. And I think Israel's going to start losing some control. What saves Israel, of course, and this goes back to what Salem says, is that you don't have any Palestinian counterpart. I mean, the PA is not an active political agent, and you don't have an end game. You know, everybody knows the two-state solution is gone, and so even this year, if you say the occupation end, the hell with settlements, Netanyahu is terrible, we want to go somewhere else, you can't go somewhere else without the Palestinian lead. Palestinians saying this is where we should be going. And without that voice, everybody will tell you, including your most pro-Palestinian MPs in the UK. I mean, even the PSC says this. We cannot advocate for a solution without the Palestinians. We can't represent Palestinians. And so you've got that problem. Even if the support for Israel and the occupation collapses completely, what do you do with that if there's nowhere to go? See, and that's why the end game is so crucial here, because unless we get an alternative voice to the PA who says the end game is a two-state solution, which is obviously a non-starter, unless we begin to get a grassroots voice of Palestinians that tells the international community, look, we have an alternative, that, you know, which has to be a single democratic state, people aren't going to know what to do, even if support for Israel begins to collapse. So that, I think, that's really the dynamic that we're struggling with, I think. Just one more word, just in terms of the trial. I mean, the trial is going on, and it's gone too far. It'll go on, but it'll go on for a long, long time. And I think in the end, Netanyahu could very well go to jail. I mean, here's a really weird thing. It shows you what things are like in Israel. He's got two choices. He can go to jail or he can become president. Because being the president is a symbolic role. But the deal that they're trying to, even within the Likud, they're trying to get to this kind of a deal, that if Netanyahu steps aside and resigns as the head of the Likud, because then the Likud could easily put together government. Saar and these other ones will come together if Netanyahu's not there. Then the president, who's Rivlin today, will give him a pardon, and they'll guarantee in an open vote, which hasn't happened before, in the parliament, that Netanyahu will be elected president as Rivlin's term expires. So that's a kind of a temptation of Netanyahu to get out of office, that he can become president. If not, then he's going to go to jail eventually down the line somewhere. So what he's trying to play is to keep this thing going, keep election after election after election going, till finally, like I said, he gets to a point where somehow he finds 61 for a long enough time that he can put in laws and rules and change things enough that he can get the court case off his back in one way or another. So it's a very the point I want to point, I guess I'm trying to make, is that what's motivating the political dynamic of Israel has nothing whatsoever to do with what we're talking about. And that's that disconnect that somehow we have to really understand. Israel's not in other words, Israel's not a partner. Israel's isn't even part of our game in a sense. So we have to think about what do we do in that reality.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff, for that insight. Now I'm just going to turn back to Salem for just 2 minutes, that's all, because then I have to do some announcements too before we bring this to a close. But I need to draw you out, Salem, a little bit more, if you unmute now, please, on who these Palestinian elections are meant to serve. They were called for what purpose? So if you could say something about that, and then should they go ahead, and if Marwan Barghouti does become elected or have support, I mean, how will that work? He's in prison, and what influence will he have? So if you could just quickly, and anything else you want to say, just in your closing comments, do share with us. Thank you, Salem.
Thank you, Linda. I'll try to fit all of that in 2 minutes. In terms of Marwan, it's so Palestinian political prisoners traditionally can run in Palestinian elections. Whether he, and I think if he runs for the presidency, if they go through, he'll win, which I think will be a big event in Palestinian politics. But again, that's a big if they go through. In terms of who are these elections serving? So I think the timing of the announcement of the election is very telling. It's when the Biden administration came into power. And I think this is part of an attempt to court the Biden administration, to present the best Palestinian foot forward, and to also renew legitimacy and a mandate for the current leadership, which has lost it. And so, the joke is, in Palestine, we wish our leadership showed us the same love they showed American administrations. But at the end of the day, it's not about real democratic change. And I mean, that's the crux, I think, of the point, and what I've kind of been sharing with you. I think us transforming our internal politics is about Palestinians. But I think what we get back to is, how do we make that environment more conducive or less conducive for our success? And that always aligns with kind of, unfortunately, government policies coming from Europe and the UK, etc., that really impact that. Whether it's the way foreign aid is given to the PA, the way it's spent, the pressure on Israel about elections and holding elections in Jerusalem, things like that. So, you fortunately get to live in a democracy where your voice is heard. And I think do always make sure that when you're using your voice to put pressure on your representation, know that it affects us as well in Palestine, whether we are free and equal. And, always try to center this idea of freedom, justice, and equality for all in your engagement, and make sure that the environment is conducive and ripe for us to be able to build the world I think we all want to see. And with that, I'll end. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Salam. It has been our pleasure, certainly, to host you and to hear your voice today. So in closing, I would like to just say a few things about us. We are so grateful for your attendance here today. We hope that you will continue to remain engaged with ICAHD UK. If you're not a member, please join us. Sign up for our newsletters and our action bulletins. Both of them come out on a monthly basis. You can see the list of our campaigns on the website. And as you go through the various campaigns, you will find background information, statistics, stories, photographs, sample letters for political representatives, and again, details on actions you can take. For now, I would like to highlight our core campaign as we call for the end of home demolitions and displacements, and that includes the evictions of Palestinians from their rightful homes. In 2020, we saw a spike in demolitions. In the first quarter of 2021, the Israeli authorities demolished, forced people to demolish, or seized at least 292 Palestinian-owned structures in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This displaced 450 people, including 246 children. This constitutes a 121% increase in the targeting of structures and a 126% increase in people displaced compared to that same period in 2020. Current flashpoints include the scheduled demolition of 70 homes in the Al Bustan area in Silwan, and the eviction of a total of 65 families from Sheikh Jarrah. 6 of the families could be evicted within the next few days itself. Both these locations are in East Jerusalem. On our website homepage, under actions you can take, please find these highlighted in the ongoing ethnic cleansing of East Jerusalem. So that will give you more information, guidance given on what you can do. There's a sample letter there for sending to your MPs. And last evening, we posted a brand new fact sheet on our website. It was prepared by Jeff, and it is on Israel's demolition. That's demolitions, found in the end demolitions section of the website. Other alerts are going out this week. Please look out for them. Please engage with them. And then our next webinar will be happening on Wednesday, the 12th of May, beginning at 5 p.m. UK time. The theme will be these flashpoints for demolitions and evictions in East Jerusalem. Jeff Halper is going to be leading through that discussion, and he will be talking with Palestinian residents from Silwan and from Sheikh Jarrah. Do look out for the publicity, register your attendance. And then our June webinar is going to be on Wednesday, the 23rd of June, and it is going to be led by ICAHD UK's chair, Monica Wusterman. She is bringing in some of our partners for our campaigns. You know, ICAHD UK works collaboratively with other organizations. There's real strength in working together. So some of our partners will be speaking about specific things we can do in the UK. So look out for that information. And again, once again, please join us, because ICAHD UK is political. We're not a charity, so we don't have access to funding from foundations and other type of help that that charities can get. So civil society, we need you, we appreciate you. You can just see a slide that is up now about joining us. So that is all I have to say. I want to thank you again for being with us today, for the insights that we've had from Salem and from Jeff. Thank you, and see you again soon. Okay, bye everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.